Florida has always sold itself as the land of sunshine and opportunity. From glittering Miami condos to sprawling Orlando suburbs, the state's economy has been built on one powerful belief: people will keep coming, and people will keep buying. For decades, that promise held true. Retirees flocked south for warmth, investors snapped up beachfront towers, and families stretched their budgets to secure a piece of paradise. Real estate wasn't just part of Florida's economy, it was the engine that powered everything else, from construction and banking to tourism and retail. But suddenly, the machine has stalled. Interest rates have soared, insurance premiums have exploded, and wages can't keep pace with the rising cost of living. Residents are pulling back, refusing to buy into the dream. For the first time in years, open houses sit empty, developers are hitting pause, and sellers are slashing prices in desperation. The fear has climbed so high that even Florida's governor has been forced to address it publicly, urging calm as panic ripples through the market. This isn't just another dip in the cycle. It feels like the foundations of Florida's growth are cracking, and nobody knows how deep the damage goes. For decades, Florida's identity has been inseparable from real estate. The state didn't just market sunshine and beaches, it sold a lifestyle, and that lifestyle was packaged in bricks, mortar, and glass towers. By 2023, more than 22 million people called Florida home, making it the fastest-growing state in the nation. Migration numbers were staggering. In just 2 years, nearly 1 million new residents poured in, many fleeing high taxes and cold winters elsewhere. Every one of them needed a place to live, and developers rushed to supply it. From Miami's skyline, which added dozens of luxury high-rises since 2010, to the booming master-planned communities around Tampa and Orlando, housing wasn't just about shelter. It became Florida's currency of confidence. At its peak, real estate made up nearly 1/5 of the state's GDP, driving jobs for construction workers, realtors, lenders, insurers, and retail. Property taxes funded schools and infrastructure, while tourism and foreign investment fed demand for condos and vacation homes. For years, it seemed unstoppable. In Miami, median condo prices climbed by over 60% between 2019 and 2022, fueled by cash buyers from Latin America, New York financiers, and even European investors seeking safe havens. In Orlando, once dominated by tourism, entire neighborhoods sprouted from empty fields, marketed to families chasing affordable homes, though affordable quickly became relative. By 2022, the median Florida home price had hit $406,700, up from just $245,000 5 years earlier. But beneath the glamour of glossy brochures and record-breaking sales was a deeper dependence. Florida's economy wasn't built on factories, tech hubs, or diversified industry. It was built on the assumption that demand for property would never stop. When residents decided to stop buying, even briefly, that assumption cracked. Developers, bankers, and politicians all understood one hard truth: if real estate slowed, the entire state slowed with it. And that's why today's panic feels different. This isn't just about numbers on a chart, it's about the very system Florida built its future on. When home buyers walk away, the ripple spreads everywhere. Fewer construction jobs, weaker retail spending, strained local budgets. Suddenly, Florida's paradise looks less like a guarantee and more like a gamble. And the governor's urgency starts to make sense. The breaking point. The breaking point didn't arrive all at once. It crept in quietly through rising interest rates, spiraling insurance bills, and paychecks that couldn't stretch far enough to keep up with soaring costs. Then, almost overnight, the slowdown became impossible to ignore. The first domino was interest rates. After years of cheap borrowing, the Federal Reserve's hikes sent mortgage rates climbing above 7% in 2023, the highest in 2 decades. For families hoping to buy, the difference was crushing. A typical $400,000 Florida home, once affordable with a 3% mortgage, suddenly cost nearly $1,000 more per month in payments. That single change priced thousands of households out of the market, cooling what had once been a feeding frenzy. Then came the insurance crisis. Florida already carried the nation's highest premiums, thanks to hurricane risks, but in recent years the numbers became staggering. By 2024, The average Florida homeowner was paying nearly $6,000 annually for property insurance, more than triple the national average. Some major insurers even abandoned the state entirely after back-to-back storms, leaving homeowners scrambling to find coverage at any cost. Without insurance, mortgages couldn't close, freezing deals that had been months in the making. Add to that the rising cost of everyday life. Inflation pushed up everything from gas to groceries, while wages lagged behind. Florida's median household income sits at roughly $67,000, well below the U.S. average, yet housing prices kept climbing out of reach. In cities like Miami, the median home price reached 8.5 times the median income, one of the worst affordability gaps in the country. The dream of home ownership was no longer attainable for many residents, and rather than stretch beyond their limits, they simply stopped buying. The signs were everywhere. Open houses that once drew bidding wars now stood eerily quiet. Developers in Orlando and Tampa, once rushing to break ground, began hitting pause on projects, citing market uncertainty. In Miami, condo towers that had sold out on blueprints only a few years ago suddenly reported unsold units piling up. The real estate machine that had fueled Florida's growth seemed to be seizing up. This was the moment that turned concern into panic. Because in Florida, when buyers walk away, the consequences echo far beyond the housing market. And at the top, the governor, usually calm, usually confident, now found himself trying to hold together an economy built on fragile ground. The governor's panic. In Florida, governors are used to managing hurricanes, not housing markets. Natural disasters strike. You declare a state of emergency, mobilize resources, and then promise recovery. But what unfolded in the real estate sector was harder to contain, because this storm was financial, invisible, and spreading into every corner of the state's economy. As reports poured in of unsold condos in Miami, stalled subdivisions near Tampa, and homeowners unable to renew their insurance, the governor's office could no longer ignore the crisis. What began as quiet concern among realtors and bankers erupted into front-page headlines. Local news outlets ran segments showing endless rows of for sale signs. Homeowners flooded call-in shows with stories of canceled closings and skyrocketing premiums. Suddenly, the prosperity that had defined Florida for decades was in doubt, and the governor was forced into the spotlight. His tone was urgent. In press conferences, he reassured residents that Florida's economy remained strong, that the downturn was temporary, and that state leaders were working on solutions. But the very fact that he had to speak at all revealed the scale of the panic. Governors rarely comment directly on real estate markets. Doing so risked amplifying the fear. Yet silence, in this case, would have been even louder. Behind the scenes, the governor convened emergency meetings with developers, bankers, and insurance executives. The fear was clear. If construction slowed, tens of thousands of jobs could evaporate. If buyers retreated, property tax revenues would shrink, leaving cities and counties unable to fund schools or repair infrastructure. And if the insurance market collapsed, even willing buyers would be locked out. The entire economic machine risked seizing up. Developers pressed for relief. Tax breaks, fast-tracked permits, and guarantees that state agencies would help stabilize insurance. Bankers pushed for signals of confidence to stop loan markets from freezing. Homeowners demanded protection against rising premiums. The governor, standing at the intersection of these competing pressures, tried to project calm while searching for real solutions. But the optics told another story. News clips showed him speaking with uncharacteristic unease, acknowledging the serious headwinds facing the housing sector. His words were carefully chosen, but his body language betrayed urgency. It wasn't just about protecting markets, it was about preventing the crisis from spilling into full-blown economic recession. The irony was impossible to ignore. Florida had marketed itself as the ultimate safe haven, a state where growth was inevitable and the dream never ended. Now, with residents refusing to buy, that illusion was cracking. The governor's visible concern became a symbol of how fragile the foundation really was. In a place where housing is the economy, panic at the top sends ripples everywhere. The governor's pleas for calm were meant to stabilize confidence, but instead they revealed how deeply shaken Florida's leadership had become. And for many residents watching from the sidelines, the question was unavoidable. If the state's leader is panicking, how bad will it get for everyone else? Economic shockwaves. When Florida's housing market sneezes, the rest of the economy catches a cold. That old saying has never felt more true than it does now. The panic at the top wasn't just about falling home values. It was about the cascading shockwaves threatening nearly every sector tied to real estate. And in Florida, that's almost everything. Start with construction. For the past decade, Florida's building industry was the beating heart of growth. New subdivisions, luxury towers, and sprawling retirement communities fueled jobs for over 500,000 workers, from carpenters and electricians to architects and landscapers. But as demand dried up, projects began stalling. Developers quietly postponed condo launches in Miami. Home builders in Orlando and Tampa reported rising cancellations, with buyers walking away from contracts they'd signed just months earlier. By mid-2025, housing starts had fallen nearly 20% year over year, according to U.S. Census data. For construction crews that once enjoyed endless overtime, the slowdown felt like a sudden halt. Then came the ripple effect. Contractors who built homes stopped calling stagers, painters, and flooring suppliers. Mortgage brokers who once thrived on a steady flow of new buyers saw applications plummet. Title companies, inspectors, and appraisers reported their leanest months in years. In South Florida alone, the slowdown was estimated to have erased nearly $1 billion in spin-off activity from industries that depend on home sales. Insurance costs only deepened the spiral. As premiums doubled and tripled, more Floridians opted to sell. But without buyers ready to step in, properties lingered. For small businesses, the housing downturn became a hidden tax. Restaurants near new subdivisions saw fewer customers. Furniture showrooms once buzzing with new homeowners became quiet. A Fort Lauderdale moving company told local reporters their bookings had dropped by almost 30% compared to the same time last year. The economic machine that once ran full throttle was beginning to grind. Tourism, Florida's other economic pillar, wasn't immune either. Investors who had banked on Airbnb profits in Miami Beach and Naples suddenly faced declining occupancy rates as oversupply collided with higher costs. Some short-term rental owners offloaded properties, adding to the flood of inventory on the market. Others hiked nightly rates to cover insurance, only to watch bookings collapse. For communities that had leaned heavily on the short-term rental economy, the shift was painful. Meanwhile, the psychological shock rippled through ordinary households. For retirees who make up nearly 21% of Florida's population, the slowdown was frightening. Many had invested their life savings into Florida real estate, either as primary homes or rental properties. Watching equity evaporate in real time brought back memories of 2008, a financial wound that never fully healed. For younger families, the fear was different. They were priced out during the boom, and now that homes were cheaper, high interest rates and insurance costs still kept them sidelined. It was a lose-lose situation. Local governments began to feel the squeeze too. Florida counties rely heavily on property taxes, which fund everything from schools to emergency services. As home values slipped, so did revenue projections. Budget meetings turned tense, with officials warning of cutbacks to public projects. Infrastructure repairs, park upgrades, and even police and fire hiring plans were suddenly under review. In a state where growth had always been the revenue engine, the slowdown threatened to choke off the money needed to keep basic services running. The governor's panic wasn't just about optics anymore, it was about math. The numbers told a grim story. Falling home sales, shrinking construction jobs, and shrinking tax bases all at once. A downturn in housing wasn't just a market story. It was an economic earthquake shaking the very foundation of Florida's sunshine dream. Problems faced by residents behind the charts, headlines, and governors' speeches lies the real story of Florida's housing crash, the people living through it. Numbers reveal the scale, but voices from the ground show the human cost. And in 2025, that cost is cutting deep. Take Broward County nurse Maria Lopez. She bought her first home in 2022 for $420,000, a dream of stability. Just 3 years later, it's worth barely $360,000. Insurance premiums doubled, her monthly bills ballooned, and now she's stuck. If I sell, I lose everything. If I stay, I can't afford the bills, she told a local reporter. Stories like hers echo across Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and Palm Beach, where many families whisper the same word: underwater. Retirees, too, are facing a nightmare. Florida was supposed to be the reward for a lifetime of work. But with average insurance costs nearing $6,000 a year, higher on the coast, some are skipping medical care or leaving altogether. In Naples, entire neighborhoods of retirees are quietly listing homes, a trend realtors call gray flight. Renters haven't escaped either. In Miami, rents are up 15% year over year, even as property values slide. The value of the building is going down, but my rent is the highest it's ever been, said Kevin, a 29-year-old tech worker in West Palm Beach. What ties these stories together is a sense of betrayal. Residents were promised a bulletproof market and lifelong security. Instead, they face falling equity, rising bills, and creeping fear about the future. This is the human side of Florida's housing crash, and it's the side the governor can't ignore. Governor's response. As the housing slowdown deepened into a full-blown crisis, the governor of Florida could no longer stand by. For years, the state's leaders had boasted about booming migration, record construction, and endless investment. But by mid-2025, the tone had shifted. Instead of press releases celebrating growth, the governor was facing panicked calls from mayors, business leaders, and homeowners demanding answers. Behind closed doors, the situation was described as a slow-motion hurricane, not a natural disaster, but an economic one tearing through every layer of the state. Reports crossed the governor's desk daily: home sales plunging, insurance companies pulling out of the market, and property tax revenues shrinking in multiple counties. Advisors warned that without swift action, the state could see layoffs across construction, banking, and local government services. The message was clear. The Florida miracle was faltering, and the panic was spreading. Publicly, the governor struck a tone of urgency. In press conferences, he acknowledged the slowdown while promising that Florida's fundamentals remained strong. People were still moving in, tourism was still thriving, and jobs were still being created. But beneath the optimism was a nervous edge. He urged homeowners not to panic sell and called on banks to show flexibility with borrowers under strain. Florida has weathered storms before and will weather this one too, he said at a June briefing. The words were meant to calm, but the fact that the governor was speaking directly about real estate, once considered untouchable, only fueled concern. Behind the scenes, task forces were convened. Insurance regulators were pressured to fast-track approvals for new companies to enter the market, hoping to slow skyrocketing premiums. Meetings with developers and realtors turned tense as they demanded relief on regulations and assessments tied to building safety laws. Local officials pressed for state-level support, warning that property tax bases were collapsing in areas hit hardest by price declines. In some counties, budgets for schools and public works were already facing shortfalls. The governor also made high-profile visits to communities most affected by the downturn. In Cape Coral, where values had fallen more than 11% in 2 years, he walked through neighborhoods dotted with "for sale" signs, speaking with families who felt trapped. In Miami, he met with condo associations struggling under the weight of $100,000 special assessments. Cameras captured him listening intently, nodding, and promising to find solutions. The visits were meant to show leadership, but they also highlighted the depth of the crisis. At the heart of his concern was not just economics, but confidence. Florida's housing market depends as much on belief as on numbers. If residents and investors believe the state is still a safe bet, the system holds. But if fear takes over, the slowdown could spiral into a collapse. That's why the governor's panic was as much about perception as reality. He understood that once faith in the Florida dream erodes, it's nearly impossible to restore. Yet, even with reassurances, many Floridians felt the message was too little, too late. Residents pointed out that warnings about affordability and insurance had been raised for years, but brushed aside in the name of growth. Now, with equity draining and costs soaring, they wondered whether the system was ever built to last. For the governor, The challenge wasn't just managing numbers on a balance sheet, it was confronting the possibility that Florida's housing boom had been a bubble all along. And as the cameras rolled, the state's top official looked less like the architect of endless prosperity and more like a man racing to hold back an economic tide. Uncertain future. The truth is, no one knows exactly where Florida's housing market is headed next. Some experts argue that what we're seeing is a correction, a painful but necessary reset after years of unsustainable growth. They point to the sheer volume of people still moving to Florida, the state's lack of income tax, and its enduring appeal as proof that demand won't disappear forever. According to recent migration data, more than 250,000 new residents still arrived in 2024, a number that continues to outpace most states. That's why optimists believe the slowdown will eventually stabilize, even if prices never return to their pandemic highs. But others see darker signs. Rising insurance premiums, stricter building codes, and the exodus of major insurers aren't temporary problems. They're structural. Families can't budget for mortgages that are affordable one year and unbearable the next. Investors, once eager to pour money into Miami or Tampa condos, are now hesitant, watching from the sidelines as resale prices dip and rental yields shrink. If the exodus of buyers continues, construction will grind to a halt, local economies will shrink, and the Florida dream could fracture in ways not seen since the Great Recession. What makes this moment so precarious is the psychology of fear. Housing markets don't collapse only because of numbers. They collapse because confidence breaks, and right now, that confidence is on the edge. The governor's reassurances may calm some, but the constant stream of headlines about falling prices, stalled projects, and panicked homeowners tells another story. For ordinary Floridians, the road ahead is filled with uncertainty. Some will cling to their homes, hoping to ride out the storm. Others will cut their losses and walk away, unwilling to watch their investments sink further. Developers will face tough decisions about whether to finish projects or leave empty lots behind. And policymakers will be tested as never before, balancing the need for immediate relief with the long-term sustainability of the market. In the end, the question is simple but devastating. Is this just a stumble on Florida's endless climb, or the beginning of a long fall? For now, residents can only wait, watch, and wonder what tomorrow's headlines will bring.